All right, lesson today, we're going to jump to 15.1 two-way frequency tables. When I was working on your report cards over the weekend, I noticed that we didn't have anything for stats and probability this term and actually all year, even though it's kind of woven in, there was nothing really addressed. So I want you guys to have something on your report card for that going into high school. All right, so here we go. We're going to do a couple lessons today and then tomorrow. I'll call it a year. All right, today it's going to be two-way frequency tables. So you guys are going to be using Edpuzzle here to help complete the fields and then draw some conclusions a little bit later on. So why don't you guys have a calculator or pen and pencil or paper ready for calculations, and it's just easier for you guys to turn in. You don't have to go back to Google Classroom. It's a lot easier to grade as well. So here we go, making a two-way table. All right, so this is our first step, is completing our table based off of our situation here. We're going to calculate the frequency, the number of times an event occurs. All right, so a poll of 120 town residents found that 40% own a bike. Of those who own a bike, 75% shop at a farmer's market. Of those who do not own a bike, 25% shop at a farmer's market. All right, so here we go. Let's start with our 120. That's going to go in our total. All right, so it goes two ways. So there's two ways to calculate it, and it'll go across when we find our missing pieces. All right, so let's start with the first part. So there's 40% that own a bike. All right, so that's going to go in this box here. So go ahead and calculate that. All right, so we have 20 times 0.4. All right, you can put the 0 there, but hopefully you guys can do that in your head. It's 120. Whoops, sorry about that. So we have 48, right? Move the decimal. We have 480. If we did it like that, hopefully you guys are good enough now to do these in your head. So we have 48. Now calculate the number that do not have a bike. All right, so you're just subtracting for this, right? So just 120 minus what you had, 48. Just make sure that you borrow the right way, right? And once you do that, we have 72. Now we're all set up to complete the rest of our numbers. All right, so here we go. Of those who own a bike, 75% shop at a farmer's market. All right, so go ahead and calculate that. Hopefully you guys are at that point where you can take 75% and turn it into a fraction. This makes it a lot easier here. And cross reduce, right? Divide both. Both are in the 4 family. All right, so you can divide that by 4. That becomes 12 out of 1. And we have 12 times 3 now, which is 36. All right, go ahead and calculate no farmer's market with bike. And we have 12. All right, lastly, of those who do not own a bike, 25% shop at a farmer's market. All right, so go ahead. So same idea, right? 25%, 1/4. And we have our 72. All right, so you can divide by 4 if you didn't use a calculator. We have 1, subtract the 4 out, 32, bring down. So we have 18 there. So we're a little sloppy. All right, so that's 18. And then now we just subtract to get the last number. All right, so go ahead and do that. All right, and we have, sorry about that, messy again. We have 54. All right, so you can check across. Do those two add up? Yes, they do. Now we're going to add straight up and down. We have 4 carry the 1, 54. And then here we have 66. So the two ways, they all add up back and forth. And now you could, if they were asked to draw conclusions, and it pretty much gives that to you right away. These next few problems, you're going to have to calculate it. But you're going to see that if you have a bike, there's a better chance of you shopping at a farmer's market. All right, so that is the whole analysis piece there. All right, let's look at our next example. We have curfew versus non-curfew. All right, so kind of a good connection to what's been going on lately, right? In terms of will curfew affect behavior? So let's take a look here. All right, so 100 teens were polled, and you'll see that number right there. Whether they are required to do chores and whether they have a curfew. All right, is there an association between having a curfew and having to do chores? All right, so let's calculate these two. All right, so let's find the relative frequency of having to do chores. All right, so having to do chores. All right, so hopefully you guys calculated that accordingly, right? So how many people had to do chores? We had our total number 20 out of 100, right? Also known as, get rid of the zeros, divide by 2 or 2 tenths, and we have 1/5, also known as 20%. All right, so now we're going to find the relative frequency of having to do chores among those who have a curfew. All right, so we'll use that. Go ahead and calculate that. All right, so that would be 16 out of 32. And that would be 50%, right? Is there a relative frequency here? So take a look. If there's no association, it means they're going to be the same, but take a look. People that had chores or had a curfew, half of them had to do chores. All right, so half of the people that have a curfew, half of them have to do chores. All right, so that's a higher number than having to do chores by itself. All right, so that means right there that if you have a curfew, there's a greater chance of you having to do chores. All right, and that has to do with the whole idea behind that. I'm sure you guys could have drawn that conclusion right away. So that means that household is a little bit more strict, which can definitely be a good thing, teaching us appropriate behavior. All right, so the strictness now of the curfew connected to more likely than to do chores. And just take a look at the other one. All right, for people that didn't have a curfew, look at that rate right there. So we have 4 to 68%. So only 4 of those households, they had to do chores. And if we're going back to our closest two strategies at the beginning of our online learning, that's really almost close to 0%, right? So that's how the association is worked in. All right, so one more example, then you guys will be on your way. All right, so this question right here is about, sorry, I should have covered that beforehand. All right, this is about looking at late versus non-late flights. All right, and this is a good connection to people who travel. All right, is there an association between international flights and a flight being late? All right, so what you have to do first of all is take a look at what's the rate for being late, period. All right, and then you kind of compare the two. Domestic, if that's what they're asking for. Again, that's inside your country, home. You think a domestic synonym for home. All right, so in your country versus going outside of your country. All right, so let's use everyday's math strategy there. All right, so what is the frequency of it being late, any flight being late? Okay, so take a look there. We're going to do our total. All right, so that's 4 out of 200, 40 out of 200, sorry. All right, and I can simplify across again to get that percent if needed, right? And now let's go to our next question. All right, find the relative frequency of a flight being late among international flights. All right, so what is it for international flights? Go ahead and type that in. All right, so let's take a look. That should be 10, right, out of the total 50. And now let's take a look. This one's already done for you right there, right? You could break that down. So we go like this, 4/20ths, 1/5. This one right here, 1/5. It's exactly the same rate in association. All right, so that third question there is compare the two. Since they're the same, it doesn't matter, right, if it's a domestic or international flight. And you could have done it the opposite way as well, right? You could have done domestic and you would have found that 30 out of 150, what is the late rate there? Again, divide 3/5. 1/5 is the same rate that you're going across. So there is no association. It's being late across the board. And those of you guys who travel, and you know how annoying it is when your flight is delayed or late upon arrival, right? All right, so here we go. We're going to do these together. You guys are going to type in your answers, and we'll be on our way. All right, so let's complete our boxes first. Let's just complete it as is here. All right, so how many, this experiment is about plants growing in shade. Do they bloom or not bloom compared to growing in sunlight? You can draw some conclusions at the end there. All right, so let's complete our boxes first of all. So what number should go there? And the number that do not bloom, that grow in shade. All right, so again, we're finding our missing box, so that should be 50. All right, so let's find this box right here. So for those that bloom, all right, if 75 of them grow in shade, how many of them grow in sunlight? Go ahead and complete that. And it's finding the missing box, the second way here, right? And that is 25. We've also gone this way, characteristic of a two-way table. I'll complete our next box, box 12. What should it be? All right, just adding the 2. And then finally our total, 235, right? All right, so here we go. Let's complete our last 2 and then come up with our conclusion. All right, so let's calculate what is the relative frequency of selecting a plant that blooms. A plant that blooms. All right, so again, we're looking at target, blooms versus total. That should be 100 over your total, okay? Next, out of plants that grow in the shade, what is the relative frequency of selecting one that blooms? All right, so hopefully you guys typed in the target, 75 over the total. All right, and then lastly, compare the relative frequencies. Is there an association between a plant that blooms and a plant that grows in shade? All right, so again, there's an association, right, if one's rate is greater than the other. All right, so just take a look at those two, let you guys decide. All right, and remember, if they're exactly the same, that means that there is no association. It means it's the same under all conditions. All right, so go ahead and draw your conclusion. All right, and just to wrap, let's take a look here again. Closest to this one is less than 50%, right? And this one right here would be over 50%. And hopefully you guys can see the connection there to 25s, right? You count by quarters, all right? You have 3 quarters on the top, and then 125 cents is 5 quarters. So that's over half, all right? So that shows you right there that when a plant grows in the shade, there's a greater chance of it blooming, all right? So kind of an interesting counterintuitive example, right? Because it's usually the other way, right? That if a plant grows in the sun, all right, it has a greater chance, but that's not the case here. It's more of a critical thinking problem. All right, so that's it for today. And any questions, let me know on this. Otherwise, we'll wrap our stats mini chapter lesson unit tomorrow.